Hello, I'm Eric Holdeman, and this is Disaster Zone, a show about emergencies and disasters that can happen anywhere and at any time. The word resilience is being used in many different settings today. Disaster resilience is a hot topic in the world of emergency management. And we're going to talk about what it means to have and make a community more disaster resilient, and what communities across America, including some right here in Western Washington, are doing. And my guest today is Lauren Alexander Augustine with the National Academies of Science. And Lauren, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for making time when you're here in the Seattle area to get this done.
It's always a pleasure.
All right. So, you live and breathe resilience pretty much every day. And it is this word that's very in vogue today. It's being used in a lot of different ways, but many times people are substituting it for saying disaster preparedness even. I mean, it's kind of substituting the words. How do you define disaster resilience?
Well, everyone wants to define it in their own way. And I think that from our point of view, my point of view, if you're thinking about it, however you want to define it works. Right. The way we define it is really focusing on just the verbs. Being able to prepare for something that could happen, to be able to absorb or withstand the shock when it comes, be able to recover from it once it passes, and be able to adapt to whatever is going to happen next.
Okay, and that applies to disasters, but you could apply that across, ecological aspect, just like personal resilience, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think that when we first started this work, we really had the lens of natural disasters. But when we started to talk to communities, people wanted to talk about, vulnerable populations. How can they be more resilient? And economic resilience. So it really does apply, like you're saying, to a lot of different aspects.
And we were talking earlier today, social equities come into the topic pretty extensively.
Well, that's right. I mean, rich people and people with resources and people of means, they're always going to be okay. And when you look at those who are most impacted, whether it's the indigent, the homeless, the people who don't have resources, they're the ones who suffer the most. And in the United States, we're a rich country, so we really talk about economic losses and property losses. But when you think about the Tunisian tsunami, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of lives.
Yes.
So it really does make a difference.
Okay. So you're associated with the National Academies of Science, which is huge.
It's a big place.
I didn't realize how big it was till we worked with you a little bit. So what types of work gets done, have been accomplished? And I call it from the 30,000 foot level. I mean, just in general, get our, not this particular project, but in general.
Well, the National Academies is an institution that's not part of the federal government. We're in Washington. We work with the feds a lot, but we're not a part of the federal government. And our role is to provide independent, objective, evidence-based advice for people who have policy-related questions. And so that can be in the realm of, who gets the water, farmers or the fish. It can be in the realm of public health, engineering, and social sciences, and of course, transportation is a big piece of the institution
huge.
As well.
I heard today there's 200 subcommittees that are working under the Transportation Research Board.
That's right.
Wow.
It's the biggest single unit in the Academy's complex.
Okay. So do you get your funding directly from Congress then? It must be appropriate somehow.
In some cases, if a bill is coming up and Congress says we need a certain type of advice, Congress can mandate a study.
Okay.
In most cases, though, our funding comes from the agencies.
Okay.
And, but also foundations, private sector, for-profit, non-for-profit.
All of those people.
All of those people, that's right.
Okay.
States even sometimes.
So, more specifically, you're involved with the Resilient America Roundtable. So tell us more about that, and then what's your particular role in that?
So my role is that I'm the director. So I run the three-ring circus, and but the round table is a bit of an unusual
Yeah, why not a
entity.
square table?
Yeah, why not
the
a square
resilient
table? That's right.
Square table.
That's right. For example, but it's an unusual unit at the academies in that we are operating from a very traditional consensus study about disaster resilience, and we were asked after that study came out if there were ways we could help people implement the recommendations that were in that initial report. And it just turned out that with the topic being very relevant to everyday people, you know, we were just talking about flooding, so lots of people have wet basements when it floods. A lot of people are susceptible to wind damage or heat damage. So this is a really good set of topics for the public interface of science. And so given that, this role that we can play in a very diverse stakeholder set of being independent, being objective, and having pretty strong convening power is a good exercise for this particular set of topics.
Okay, sometimes I call that the emergency manager's role being a facilitated leadership.
That's right.
I mean, you're not directing, certainly have no power, authority, so it's this convening
That's right.
aspect to it. So you mentioned the study. Could you go in that just a little bit, what that genesis was, and then who's funding the roundtable's effort since I was thinking, well, it'd been Congress, but maybe it came out of another
Well, I'll take the second question first.
Okay.
And the funders for the Resilient America Roundtable are a very similar range to what I said. We have a lot of alphabet soup of the agencies, FEMA, DHS, NOAA, USGS, et cetera. And we have some foundations who support us, and we even have some private sector.
Okay, is the Rockefeller Foundation involved with this at all?
We are, not officially, but we are in very close contact. Their 100 Resilient Cities Challenge program is very aligned philosophically with the work we're doing. And so we are in pretty close contact as we kind of maintain our parallel tracks.
Okay. And then, again, the originating study that kind of said, oh, we should now do something with this.
Yeah, so that study was brought together, it was produced and published in 2012, and we spent about a year after that kind of socializing this idea of resilience. You know, what does it mean, and what does it look like, or what could it look like, because this is a while ago now. And as we started having those discussions after the report came out, people were like, these are the conversations we really need to have. And so, can we help? So this report basically says, if you want to build resilience, you need to really understand your risk and be able to communicate that risk in some kind of reasonable way, right? The second thing is you really need to be able to measure resilience. You know,
yeah, we're going to talk more about that.
Okay.
Yes.
The third piece was that this is not just an emergency management issue. So how do you build the partnerships within a community or broader than that to make sure that you get all these aspects in? And the final thing is like the really kind of low-tech one, which is can people share what they know? You know, what is Seattle doing? What is Tulsa doing? What is Boston or New York doing? And so people really want to know, you know, what did you try? How much does it cost? What worked? What didn't work?
Right.
So there's a big sharing element as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lots to do with relationships, it sounds
A lot
like.
to do with relationships, that's right.
Okay. So I know you have specific roundtable members.
We do.
And so what's that general makeup type of thing? I mean, is it 100 or 20 people or?
It's a pretty big unit for what you might find at the academies normally. It's about 35 people.
Okay.
And some of those people are federal agency representatives. The beautiful thing about the agencies is that they can kind of bring depth, you know, so we might get some headquarter people, but then we might get some district people, we might get some, subject matter expert kind of people. Then we have academics. We have to make sure that the work that we do is rigorous and robust and right. So we have to make sure it's right.
But sometimes I say the truth changes. And it's one of the issues, actually, emergency management has had a little bit of trouble with science on sometimes, because sometimes the science does change through new discoveries and aspects
Well, that's absolutely
like that.
right. You know, but you do have to do your best with what you have, so the best available science. And as technology increases, as instrumentation gets better, as communications get better, you know, that'll adjust. But work with what you have right now. And then we have practitioners, and we have private sector.
Now, what's a practitioner? It's not the family practitioner. It's the
that's right.
it's the people on the not lowest level. I don't know.
But these are people who might be local emergency managers or work in an emergency management office.
On critical infrastructure.
Critical infrastructure.
Transportation planners.
Exactly.
Okay.
You know, so that we get that kind of reality check.
Yeah, they're getting their hands dirty somehow.
And they can also inform. This is very much two-way learning. This isn't just for the academicians and the feds to say this is what's going on. It's also, it's just lots of different ways learning. So we have quite a mix on the roundtable in terms of the membership.
All right. So as we look at the focus for the roundtable, you know, what is it you're looking to achieve, and what's success look like? You talked about the program area emphasis, but and we'll, again, we have a particular question on measuring resilience, but you know, what's success look like? And you've talked about a number of communities. We're going to get in more depth there, but I'm sure you're getting a sense for, you know, it might look different in different places.
Oh, well, first of all, that is absolutely an understatement. It does look different in different places. But what this program really wants to accomplish, it's very much experimental. It's very experimental. Okay. You know, but the idea is, what is the role of bringing in experts and better analytics, better analysis, access to different data that might be more accurate data, and you know, and bring in a framework of risk communication, measures, et cetera. Can this inform the decision making at the local level, or maybe how well this is informed? And you know, so that's really the big question of when decision makers at the local level, which is where we're working, are trying to make decisions today under conditions of stretched resources and under conditions of uncertainty, right? For impact much further down the road, for tomorrow and beyond. It's a very complicated set of issues, and it's very easy to punt and say, not in my term of office, I can take my $20 million, put it in schools and get reelected, versus $20 million in earthquake retrofits that don't happen until many, many years after my term has ended.
What I appreciate and that I've observed so far is you aren't taking a cookie cutter approach to it. That, you know, this is our formula, blah, blah, and it makes it messier, and it appears to me, but you're going to each community and trying to let them choose how this all works, which I compliment you on.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, the idea is that we don't have anything to sell, and we don't have a model to test. You know, I mean, I suppose our framework of the 4 things is what we're testing. But really, our research suggests that when outside groups come in with that kind of approach, it's hard for the community to maintain that over time. And if they don't believe, or you know, it's harder to maintain. So our approach is not really a cookie cutter approach. But we do have a process. There's method to the madness. And the first step is to really listen. And you know, we've been in Seattle for 9 months or so, listening, trying to figure out what's the priority here, what's the contribution, where's the need, who's doing what. So each community kind of establishes its own priority of what makes the place the place. And then we kind of, you know, move from that priority. Okay, well, what does that look like in terms of resilience? Are there certain objectives that fit that?
Actually, a light bulb went on for me earlier today when we talked about the integration. That originally I was thinking, okay, there's going to be a plan, a product, something that comes out of this. And I think the key word we talked about earlier today again was integration. It's not trying to do anything special, but trying to get resilience integrated into everything that they're trying to work on now. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yes, I have 2 things on that. You know, one is that everyone who's in this space, you know, is busy, and budgets are tight, and so this notion of coming in with a new plan it's just never going to get done. You know, people are too busy to take on a new plan. So whatever this resilience thing is, it needs to be integrated. It needs to fit into the work that's already being done, right? And so that's one piece of it. And the other piece of it is the social and economic aspects of it. I mean, social equity, vulnerable populations. No one wants to look on TV and see their most disenfranchised really in a tough spot during an emergency of some sort. So, you know, how do you build resilience to include everyone? And what makes any community run? The economics of the place. Right. You know, so those two together seem to really build. And if those become kind of stable or strong or even resilient, then when the shock or the disruption comes, the whole place will roll a little bit more easily.
Well, listen, we're halfway through the show.
How about that?
We're gonna, for you folks at home, we're gonna take a quick break for this message. When we come back, we're gonna be talking more about disaster resilience. And the first question is gonna be, how do you measure resilience for Lauren? So stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
As a mom, it's your job to prepare for this. Your children rely on you for safety and health. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and you need to be prepared.
For more information on catastrophe preparedness, go to makeitthrough.org.
Welcome back to Disaster Zone. I'm Eric Holdeman, and today's guest is Lauren Alexander Augustine with the National Academies of Science, and we've been talking about disaster resilience here, Lauren, in the first half. So I want to come back. I promised I'd ask you the question, how do we measure resilience? Is the scale 1 to 10, 1 to 100? I mean, is there a C grade, a D, A? How do we measure it?
This is the $64,000 question, and there are a lot of efforts out there right now. You know, so we're working with the Zurich Foundation, Zurich Insurance, that's a foundation. We're working with them on measuring flood resilience. Now that's an index, you know, so that's a compressed index. There are the American Society of Civil Engineers has a scorecard, A to F. So there's lots of ways to measure it. I think that one of the things that we'll be looking at in this program is what are the elements that local decision makers can actually use. Some of these measurement tools are pretty complicated. They're pretty, you know, they're hard to use.
They're academic. I don't know.
They might be academic. They might be really resource intensive if it's a lot of surveys and things like that. So we're trying to glean which tools or which types of questions really get at the question of how resilient are you? Okay.
So we mentioned that the Puget Sound, Seattle area is not the only community you're working with. Can you give us a kind of a snapshot of the other communities across the United States you're working with? What hazards, you know, is kind of defining their work?
Sure. So we're small. You know, I mean, we talked about the Rockefeller program. That's 100 cities. We're dealing with like 4 communities, and so we roughly chop the country up into the west, the middle, and the east. So we wanted to get some geographic diversity, and we wanted to get a diversity on hazards. So the Seattle, Puget Sound region came up for its range of hazards, including the hazards that are kind of specific to a port city and a western city, and, you know, climate change and sea level rise.
And earthquake,
flooding, landslides, etc.
Volcanoes.
Volcanoes. So there are a number of different hazards, and when you talk about resilience, usually the first question is resilient to what? And so to have a nice menu is always helpful. In the middle of the country, working in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, in Lynn County, Iowa, and the last one I can't quite say on TV yet because we haven't quite confirmed them, but hopefully in Tornado Alley, and in the southern part of the middle part of the country.
Does it start with a T?
It might.
It might. Okay.
So, you know, so we have riverine flooding and tornadoes in Iowa, and then down in Tornado Alley, obviously tornado, but drought and fire, and also flooding. Flooding's everywhere, so you have that. And then the one in the east is Charleston, South Carolina, that has 19 natural hazards, except for volcanoes and sandstorms. So seismic risk, hurricanes, flooding, etc.
Okay. So as you work with these communities, you know, they're different culturally. So what are the similarities and differences you've seen in the culture of emergency management, approach to disasters, their understanding of resilience? Just any general observations you can?
Yeah, one consistency, one thing that's consistent across every place we've worked and interacted with people is that people who are in emergency management are very dedicated. These are dedicated public servants who are first responders and planners at the same time. Yeah. And so this notion of saving lives and first, and then saving property and assets second is extremely consistent. No one I've spoken with has ever said, I'm not interested in being resilient. And no one has ever said that. Right. So those are the consistencies. People want this, they want something better for their community. Another consistency is that every place either wants to sustain or advance their quality of life. Okay? So those are the consistencies. But the differences are also pretty big. Here in Seattle region, there's a great embrace of the chance and the risk of climate change, of sea level rise, of even a pretty substantial seismic risk.
Oh yeah,
and,
huge.
Right? And so people are willing to really talk about that in an open way, even though it's hard to talk about risk, right? And in some places it's like, it might be too hard to talk about, or the risk isn't that well understood. And so kind of coming into, what does it mean that you live in a 100-year flood?
Yeah.
Does it mean
100-year floodplain?
100-year floodplain, right? Does it mean that because you flooded last year, you have 99 years to go?
No.
No, it doesn't mean that, right?
Yep.
So, or if you are in a seismic zone and you haven't had an earthquake in 278 years, say.
Yeah, or 10 years.
Or 10 years.
15.
Or whatever it is, how do you understand, why should you bother to think about that if it hasn't happened in so long? You know what I mean? So there are differences, and I think that the biggest differences, though, are when we talk about priorities. Each place has something special and unique that makes it its own place. So.
Okay. Well, before we talk about what you're trying to do here specifically, since you brought up risk, I think it's a great time. I get very frustrated, personally, in trying to get people to acknowledge that living right by the water generally isn't. It's wonderful. It's nature. You got animals, eagles. And all that, but there are things called tsunamis. You do have landslides on bluffs, as you see in California, type of thing. So understanding communicating risk, what could you share with me? I mean, I've been in therapy now for about 10 years for this issue. So maybe somebody listening here today might discern some aspect of it.
So what we hear the most, not so much in our communities, but just kind of around the country, is that people really do not readily assume that they have to assume any risk on their own, right? So something could happen, but
they're trying to transfer it.
Right, it either won't happen here.
Yeah,
if it does happen here, it won't happen to me.
This is my 4 stages of denial. Got 2 more.
If it does happen to me, the federal government, the government's going to come in and make it better.
It will not be that bad.
Okay, it won't be that bad.
And if it does happen to me, it is that bad, there's nothing I can do about it, which means you don't have to do anything.
So, what people often kind of overlook, or they think maybe FEMA's going to come right in, that's not how it's supposed to work.
Right.
It's supposed to work that you deal with it at home, and then it slowly escalates. Even if it's something huge, catastrophic, of course, that's what the federal government's here to do.
Yes.
But there should always be, part of the risk discussion is that we all are at risk for something. Whether it's a windstorm that takes out your transformer, it can happen, right? So your first line of responsibility is in your own house. Everyone's a decision maker. If you're a spouse, if you're a parent, if you're a pet owner, you have responsibility for something, people and things you care about, and then it kind of grows. So there's a personal, level, there's a local level, there's a regional level, there's a state level, and there's a federal level. So this risk can get moved, but if you if you want to reduce your risk, there are things you can do. You can mitigate, you can prepare, you can
buy
manage.
insurance
You can buy insurance, you can transfer your risk, you can hedge, all these things, yeah.
So, and we got maybe about 4 minutes left here,
Okay.
but aligned with this whole risk, have you seen that communications and the interaction be different between work in public sector, government, or the business sector?
Well, they are different, and I think that the public sector is focused on kind of more general audiences for risk. So this is about the public spaces and infrastructure and shared the common, right? The commons. And in the business community, up until pretty recently, the risk is about to that company. Its employees, making sure its employees can get to work.
Their stockholders.
Their stockholders, et cetera.
Their stock price.
But now it's starting to come together, I think, a little bit more, and we see this. Earlier I talked about setting priorities for the community. Well, if a community, for example, Charleston is a good example of this. One of the pieces of that community is it's a very hot tourist place. So that's a public sector interest. It's also a private sector interest, And so if tourism is a big part of their economy, it's the hotels, it's the restaurants, it's the retail. So here you have this alignment of priority, and then the sharing can be a lot easier.
Okay. So real quickly, what's happening here?
So
in about a minute.
Yeah, so in Seattle region, what we and so we're looking at the 4-county Puget Sound region as the bigger piece, and maybe even down to the neighborhood level. What we've learned in our listening tour over the last year or so or less is transportation is a major priority here. And that relates, of course, to traffic. But it also relates to mobility of people. You have a big port, so it's mobility of goods, and also economic mobility. And there's a lot of high-paying, white-collar jobs coming in, and there's a real interest to make sure that the advancements that happen here in this region are advancements for everyone. So there's a very strong social equity piece that goes on these mobility and transportation issues. And so here we're trying to take the transportation lens of those 3 aspects of mobility and mesh that with social equity to really understand, when you think of a resilient transportation function, is it working for, the First Nations? Is it working for communities of color? Is it working as well, for non-native English speakers, as it is for those who have the means? So it's really quite refreshing. It's very heartwarming, actually, that in a place so big, so many people, such a rich place, that the major thrust that is extremely consistent from the federal level to the state, to the cities, to the counties, to the region, everyone's really talking about the social equity.
Okay.
So
could you just, a couple sound bites on the, I thought it was the scalability aspect. You talked about maybe trying to do something very local up to regional.
So these issues of priorities, and particularly, these issues of mobility, and then you bring in a risk. Is that going to be climate change or seismic? We're not sure. We're still discussing, the specific risk. But when you look at those risks and those questions of mobility at the neighborhood scale, or the regional county scale, or the bigger one, are there differences? Are there problems at the local scale that can only be solved at the regional scale, or vice versa? So we're hoping to get a pretty comprehensive package and understanding for the regional leaders.
We're out of time.
How about that?
Listen, thank you for being on the show. Thanks for your leadership nationally here on resilience, and you get to keep the Disaster Zone Cup
I'm
and
so
take
excited.
Take it to Charleston, please.
I will. I'll take it to Charleston, take it to Iowa, take it to that other city I can't say yet.
That's right. Might start with a T.
Might start with a T. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for being on the show. And for you folks at home, this brings us to the close and end of our show for today. Thanks for tuning in, learning more about what you and others can do to become better prepared and resilient for disasters. And remember, if you're going to get resilient, today is a good day to start. Have a great day and tune in again soon. Bye-bye.